to 100 reporters and editors at the Associated Press have been targeted in a massive US government surveillance operation against the news service. AP is calling the monitoring network created by the Justice Department itself unprecedented in size and scope and a gross violation of privacy. Well, let's cross now to RT's Ghana Chichikan, who's been tracking the fallout. Ghana, there in Washington, so a lot of anger over this incident. Tell us exactly what did the authorities subject the Associated Press to?
Well, Bill, anger is sort of an understatement for the journalistic community in general, and not just the Associated Press that fell victim to this sweeping surveillance campaign. Everybody suddenly realized how easily they can get caught up in this under some very general warrant, a secret warrant. The U.S. Justice Department secretly obtained 2 months of telephone records, targeting AP reporters and editors' work and personal phone numbers. AP believes more than 100 of its journalists were caught up in this surveillance sweep. The AP boss called it a massive and unprecedented intrusion into how news organizations operate. Here's his statement.
There can be no possible justification for such an overbroad collection of the telephone communications of the Associated Press. These records potentially disclose information about the AP's activities and operations that the government has no conceivable right to know.
The Justice Department acknowledged having spied on AP journalists. They cited an ongoing criminal investigation, but the AP's president said the government sought and obtained information far beyond anything that could be justified by any specific investigation. Now, Eric Holder, the Attorney General, was confronted by the journalist's legitimate outrage, and he successfully walked away from all questions, saying that he has not ordered it, that he, in fact, recused himself from the investigation because he himself was interviewed in relation to that very investigation. Now, it apparently had to do with AP's reporting on a CIA operation in Yemen last year and the government's possible hunt for leaks. No details and explanations came out of the White House, though. Here is the president's press secretary.
The president feels strongly that we need the press to be able to be unfettered in its pursuit of investigative journalism. And you saw when he was a senator, the president co-sponsored legislation that would have provided further protections for journalists in this regard.
Now, despite all that, the administration's unprecedented hunt for leaks has had an enormous chilling effect on investigative journalism. A number of journalists with major news organizations told me that it's never been as hard for them to do their job as it is now because sources that they had previously communicated with now either don't return their calls or say out front that they'd rather not talk than go to jail. The Obama administration has brought more cases against whistleblowers than all previous presidents combined. Now, as the news emerged that the Justice Department has secretly cast this wide surveillance net on journalists, many journalists felt like it's not just a hunt for whistleblowers. They felt that they're being targeted as well.
Ghana, thanks very much indeed for that live update there in Washington. RT's Ghana Chichikan. Well, let's get some perspective on this now with RT contributor Afshin Rattansi. He joins me in London. Afshin, in the words of the White House press secretary, he says classified information has to stay classified. He's got a point, hasn't he?
Well, indeed, and according to their own practices, they weren't able to notify the head of Associated Press because it would undermine the security of the whole operation. Look, the idea of justice anyway in the United States, around the world, that we've seen, how can there be a Department of Justice when they're torturing hunger strikers in Cuba? And as for Eric Holder himself, well, what exactly are they thinking when they're actually naming Associated Press? The American taxpayer will have to pay reparations to Associated Press because, let's face it, no whistleblower or source is now going to call the AP desk in New York or Washington, D.C. More generally, it has to be said that given the Obama administration's attitude, as you mentioned earlier, you're not really an American journalist if you're not, if your phone calls aren't being recorded, or at least the phone logs aren't being noted down and sent to the FBI, I'd say.
So this is a blatant attempt by the Obama administration to silence whistleblowers, and if that's the case, could they actually succeed?
Well, there seems to be a philosophical problem, actually, because, of course, I have to say, at organizations I've worked at, which had some great scoops, like identifying the 9/11 hijacking team and so on. Is the journalist to blame? Well, of course, journalists should, if they know of an imminent threat, alert the authorities if there's going to be an attack on an airliner in Yemen. How strange it would be Yemen, where, of course, President Obama sanctioned the murder of a U.S. citizen, teenager. So, of course, journalists have that responsibility. But this kind of operation, and to admit it in this way, I think is the surprising aspect of the story. We've got to remember, the United States, for a long time, I mean, Gary Webb, the great journalist who saw how cocaine was being taken from Central America into the United States and the cities to destroy the civil rights movement, he couldn't get a job. The way normally that the United States authorities deal with journalists that are very good is to destroy their reputations. He committed suicide. And in this case, the Department of Justice has been rather open. And I suppose you saw that a little in the way Jay Carney answered his question, saying it's nothing to do with the White House, we can't comment on it. And then, of course, you see Eric Holder pushing the blame onto his deputy, James Cole, who will have to answer the questions, although we don't expect that Attorney General and Mr. Holder to last much longer. He's answering questions on Wednesday at the House of Representatives.
You talked about journalists being responsible, but of course, look what's happened in the UK recently with a phone hacking scandal. Are you saying that journalists should be entirely protected? Because some are saying they have acted irresponsibly, particularly in the UK, and should be monitored.
Yeah, as for journalists in Britain, it was, of course, celebrity stories and the ordinary people's lives that they were trying to destroy. Interestingly, that was done with the connivance of the legal authorities here, the police force, so many metropolitan police officers. And I'd say in the United States, too, this Yemen airliner story, John Brennan had to answer questions before becoming CIA director. He was Obama's counterterrorism chief. What did he know about this supposed al-Qaeda plot on an American airliner headed for the United States based in Yemen? He didn't really answer, but he said he didn't do the leaks. So who is the leaker? And will any people leak information from the Obama White House? And we know so many wrongs are being committed every day, whether it be torture or drones and so forth. Legitimately, people should be leaking from that White House. But who are they going to leak to? Not to the Associated Press. A coup for Reuters?
And just briefly, drawing a very fine line, isn't it, between perhaps suppressing information that the public shouldn't know because it could well compromise national security and, of course, curbing freedom of speech and information. So it's a quite a delicate balance, isn't it, Afshin, just finally?
Well, in the past hour or so, President Obama, of course, earlier, his spokesman, Jay Carney, had been saying he believes in an unfettered press. He was great as a senator in the U.S. Senate before he became president, blah, blah, blah. The famous Watergate reporters, even though Watergate wasn't the big story that was going on there, but we don't have time to go into that. But Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward have both said in the past hour that Obama has unleashed a nuclear bomb when it comes to journalism in the United States and the First Amendment of the United States Constitution.
Afshin, thanks very much indeed. Good to hear your perspective. Afshin Rattansi live there in London.